Day 4, the fourth story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron, by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 4, the fourth story. Gerbino, in breach of the plighted faith of his grandfather, King Guglielmo, attacks a ship of the King of Tunis to defend his daughter. She being slain by those aboard the ship, he slays them, and afterwards he is beheaded.
Lauretta, her story ended, kept silence, and the king brooded as in deep thought, while one or another of the company deplored the sad fate of this or the other of the lovers, or censured Ninette's wrath, or made some other comment. At length, however, the king roused himself, and raising his head, made sign to Elisa that was now for her to speak. So modestly Elisa thus began.
Gracious ladies, not a few there are that believe that love loses no shafts save when he is kindled by the eyes, contemning their opinion that hold that passion may be engendered by words, whose error will be abundantly manifest in a story which I purpose to tell you, wherein you may see how mere rumor not only wrought mutual love in those that had never seen one another, but also brought both to a miserable death. Guglielmo the second, as the Sicilians compute, King of Sicily, had 2 children, a son named Ruggeri and a daughter named Costanza. Ruggeri died before his father, and left a son named Gerbino, who, being carefully trained by his grandfather, grew up a most goodly gallant, and of great renown in court and camp, and that not only within the borders of Sicily, but in divers other parts of the world, among them Barbary, then tributary to the King of Sicily. And among others, to whose ears was wafted the bruit of Gerbino's magnificent prowess and courtesy, was a daughter of the King of Tunis, who, by averment of all that had seen her, was a creature as fair and debonair, and of as great and noble a spirit as nature ever formed. To hear tell of brave men was her delight, and what she heard, now from one, now from another, of the brave deeds of Gerbino, she treasured him in her mind so sedulously, and pondered them with such pleasure, rehearsing them to herself in imagination, that she became hotly enamored of him, and there was none of whom she talked, or heard others talk, so gladly. Nor, on the other hand, had the fame of her incomparable beauty and other excellences failed to travel, as to other lands, so also to Sicily, where, falling on Gerbino's ears, it gave him no small delight, to such effect that he burned for the lady no less vehemently than she for him. Wherefore, until such time as he might, upon some worthy occasion, have his grandfather's leave to go to Tunis, yearning beyond measure to see her, he charged every friend of his that went thither to give her to know, as best he might, his great and secret love for her, and to bring him tidings of her; which office one of the said friends discharged with no small address, for, having obtained access to her, after the manner of merchants, by bringing jewels for her to look at, he fully apprised her of Gerbino's passion, and placed him and all that he possessed entirely at her disposal. The lady received both messenger and message with gladsome mien, made answer that she loved with equal ardor, and in token thereof sent Gerbino one of her most precious jewels. Gerbino received the jewel with extreme delight, and sent her many a letter and many a most precious gift by the hand of the same messenger, and 'twas well understood between them that, should fortune accord him opportunity, he should see and know her. Of this footing the affair remained somewhat longer than was expedient, and so, while Zerbino and the lady burned with mutual love, it befell that the king of Tunis gave her in marriage to the king of Granada, whereat she was wroth beyond measure, for that she was not only going into a country remote from her lover, but, as she deemed, was severed from him altogether. And so this might not come to pass, gladly, could she but have seen how, would she have left her father and fled to Zerbino. In like manner Zerbino, on learning of the marriage, was vexed beyond measure, and was ofttimes minded, could he but find means to win to her husband by sea, to wrest her from him by force. Some rumour of Zerbino's love and of his intent reached the king of Tunis, who, knowing his prowess and power, took alarm, and as the time drew nigh for conveying the lady to Granada, sent word of his purpose to King Guglielmo, and craved his assurance that it might be carried into effect without let or hindrance on the part of Zerbino or anyone else. The old king had heard nothing of Zerbino's love affair, and never dreaming that 'twas on such account that the assurance was craved, granted it without demur, and in pledge thereof sent the king of Tunis his glove. Which received, the king made ready a great and goodly ship in the port of Carthage, and equipped her with all things meet for those that were to man her, and with all appointments apt and seemingly for the reception of his daughter, and awaited only fair weather to send her therein to Granada. All which the young lady seeing and marking, sent one of her servants privily to Palermo, bidding him greet the illustrious Zerbino on her part, and tell him that a few days would see her on her way to Granada, wherefore 'twould now appear whether or no he were really as doughty a man as he was reputed, and loved her as much as he had so often protested. The servant did not fail to deliver her message exactly, and returned to Tunis, leaving Zerbino, who knew that his grandfather King Guglielmo had given the king of Tunis the desired assurance, at a loss how to act. But prompted by love, and goaded by the lady's words, and loath to seem a craven, he hied him to Messina, and having there armed 2 light galleys, and manned them with good men and true, he put to sea and stood for Sardinia, deeming that the lady's ship must pass that way. Nor was he far out in his reckoning, for he had not been there many days, when the ship sped by a light breeze, hove in sight not far from the place where he lay in wait for her. Whereupon Zerbino said to his comrades, "Gentlemen, if you be as good men and true as I deem you, there is none of you but must have felt, if he feel not now, the might of love. For without love I deem no mortal capable of true worth or aught that is good. And if you are or have been in love, 'twill be easy for you to understand that which I desire. I love, and 'tis because I love that I have laid this travail upon you, and that which I love is in the ship that you see before you, which is fraught not only with my beloved, but with immense treasures, which, if you are good men and true, we, so we but play the man in fight, may with little trouble make our own. Nor for my share of the spoils of the victory demand I aught but a lady, whose love it is that prompts me to take arms. All else I freely cede to you from this very hour. Forward then, attack we this ship, success should be ours, for God favours our enterprise, nor lends her wind to evade us." Fewer words might have sufficed the illustrious Zerbino, for the rapacious Messenices that were with him were already bent heart and soul upon that to which by his harangue he sought to animate them. So when he was done, they raised a mighty shout, so that 'twas as if trumpets did blare, and cut up their arms, and smiting the water with their oars, overhauled the ship. The advancing galleys were observed while they were yet a great way off by the ship's crew, who, not being able to avoid the combat, put themselves in a posture of defense. Arrived at close quarters, the illustrious Gerbino bade send the ship's masters aboard the galleys, unless they were minded to do battle. Certified of the challenge, and who they were that made it, the Saracens answered that 'twas in breach of the faith plighted to them by their assailant's king that they were thus attacked, and in token thereof displayed King Guglielmo's glove, averring in set terms that there should be no surrender either of themselves or of aught that was aboard the ship without battle. Gerbino, who had observed the lady standing on the ship's poop, and seen that she was far more beautiful than he had imagined, burned with a yet fiercer flame than before, and to the display of the glove made answer that, as he had no falcons there just then, the glove booted him not. Wherefore, so they were not minded to surrender the lady, let them prepare to receive battle. Whereupon, without further delay, the battle began on both sides with a furious discharge of arrows and stones, on which wise it was long protracted to their common loss, until at last Gerbino, seeing that he gained little advantage, took a light bark which they had brought from Sardinia, and having fired her, bore down with her, and both the galleys, upon the ship. Whereupon the Saracens, seeing that they must perforce surrender the ship or die, caused the king's daughter, who lay beneath the deck weeping, to come up on deck, and led her to the prow, and shouting to Gerbino, while the lady shrieked alternately mercy and succour, opened her veins before his eyes, and cast her into the sea, saying, "Take her, we give her to thee on such wise as we can, and as thy faith has merited." Maddened to witness this deed of barbarism, Gerbino, as if courting death, recked no more of the arrows and the stones, but drew alongside the ship, and, despite the resistance of her crew, boarded her, and as a famished lion ravens amongst a herd of oxen, and tearing and rending, now one, now another, gluts his wrath before he appears his hunger, so Gerbino, sword in hand, hacking and hewing on all sides among the Saracens, did ruthlessly slaughter not a few of them, till, as the burning ship began to blaze more fiercely, he bade the seamen take thereout all that they might by way of guerdon, which done, he quitted her, having gained but a rueful victory over his adversaries. His next care was to recover from the sea the body of the fair lady, whom long and with many a tear he mourned. And so he returned to Sicily, and gave the body honourable sepulture in Ustica, an islet that faces, as it were, Trapani, and went home the saddest man alive. When these tidings reached the king of Tunis, he sent to King Guglielmo ambassadors, habited in black, who made complaint of the breach of faith, and recited the manner of its occurrence, which caused King Guglielmo no small chagrin, and seeing not how he might refuse the justice they demanded, he had Gerbino arrested, and he himself, none of his barons being able by any entreaty to turn him from his purpose, sentenced him to forfeit his head, and had it severed from his body in his presence, preferring to suffer the loss of his only grandson than to gain the reputation of a faithless king. And so miserably, within the compass of a few brief days, died the two lovers by woeful deaths, as I have told you, and without having known any joyance of their love. End of Day 4, the 4th story.
Day 4, the 5th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by J.C. Guan. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Reg. Day 4, the 5th story. Lisabetta's brothers slay her lover. He appears to her in a dream, and shows her where he is buried. She privately disinters the head, and sets it in a pot of basil, whereupon she daily weeps a great while. The pot being taken from her by her brothers, she dies not long after.
Elisa's story ended, the king bestowed a few words of praise upon it, and then laid the burden of discourse upon Philomela, who, full of compassion for the woes of Gerbino and his lady, heaved a piteous sigh, and thus began.
My story, gracious ladies, will not be of folk of so high a rank as those of whom Elisa has told us, but perchance 'twill not be less touching. 'Tis brought to my mind by the recent mention of Messina, where the matter befell. Know then that there were at Messina 3 young men, that were brothers and merchants, who were left very rich on the death of their father, who was of San Gimignano, and they had a sister, Lisabetta by name, a girl fair enough and no less debonair, but whom, for some reason or another, they had not as yet bestowed in marriage. The 3 brothers had also in their shop a young paysan, Lorenzo by name, who managed all their affairs, and who was so goodly of person and gallant that Lisabetta bestowed many a glance upon him, and began to regard him with extraordinary favour, which Lorenzo, marking from time to time, gave up all his other amours, and in like manner began to affect her, and so, their loves being equal, 'twas not long before they took heart of grace, and did that which each most desired, wherein, continuing to their no small mutual solace and delight, they neglected to order it with due secrecy, whereby one night, as Lisabetta was going to Lorenzo's room, she, all unwittingly, was observed by the eldest of the brothers, who, albeit much distressed by what he had learned, yet, being a young man of discretion, was swayed by considerations more seemly, and, allowing no word to escape, spent the night in turning the affair over in his mind in divers ways. On the morning he told his brothers that which, touching Lisabetta and Lorenzo, he had observed in the night, which, that no shame might thence ensue either to them or to their sister, they after long consultation determined to pass over in silence, making as if they had seen or heard naught thereof, until such time as they in a safe and convenient manner might banish this disgrace from their sight before it could go further. Adhering to which purpose, they jested and laughed with Lorenzo, as they had been wont, and after a while, pretending that they were all 3 going forth of the city on pleasure, they took Lorenzo with them, and being come to a remote and very lonely spot, seeing that 'twas apt for their design, they took Lorenzo, who was completely off his guard, and slew him, and buried him on such wise that none was ware of it. On their return to Messina, they gave out that they had sent him away on business, which was readily believed, because 'twas what they had been frequently used to do. But as Lorenzo did not return, and Lisabetta questioned the brothers about him with great frequency and urgency, being sorely grieved by his long absence, it so befell that one day, when she was very pressing in their enquiries, one of the brothers said, "What means this? What means this? What hast thou to do with Lorenzo, that thou shouldst ask about him so often? Ask us no more, or we will give thee such answer as thou deservest." So the girl, sick at heart and sorrowful, fearing she knew not what, asked no questions, but many a time at night she called piteously to him, and besought him to come to her, and bewailed his long tarrying with many a tear, and ever yearning for his return, languished in total dejection. But so it was, that one night, when, after long weeping that her Lorenzo came not back, she had at last fallen asleep, Lorenzo appeared to her in a dream, wan and in utter disarray, his clothes torn to shreds and sodden, and thus, as she thought, he spoke: "Lisabetta, thou dost not but call me, and vex thyself for my long tarrying, and bitterly upbraid me with thy tears, wherefore be it known to thee that return to thee I may not, because the last day that thou didst see me, thy brother slew me." After which he described the place where they had buried him, told her to call and expect him no more, and vanished. The girl then awoke, and doubting not that the vision was true, wept bitterly, and when morning came, and she was risen, not daring to say aught to her brothers, she resolved to go to the place indicated in the vision, and see if what she had dreamed were even as it appeared to her. So, having leave to go a little way out of the city for recreation in company of a maid that had at one time lived with them and knew all that she did, she hied her thither with all speed, and having removed the dry leaves that were strewn about the place, she began to dig where the earth seemed least hard. Nor had she dug long before she found the body of her hapless lover, whereon as yet there was no trace of corruption or decay, and thus she saw without any manner of doubt that her vision was true. And so, saddest of women, knowing that she might not bewail him there, she would gladly, if she could, have carried away the body and given it more honourable sepulture elsewhere. But as she might not do so, she took a knife, and, as best she could, severed the head from the trunk, and wrapped it in a napkin, and laid it in the lap of her maid, and having covered the rest of the corpse with earth, she left the spot, having been seen by none, and went home. There she shut herself up in her room with the head, and kissed it 1,000 times in every part, and wept long and bitterly over it, till she had bathed it in her tears. She then wrapped it in a piece of fine cloth, and set it in a large and beautiful pot of the sort in which marjoram or basil is planted, and covered it with earth, and therein planted some roots of the goodliest basil of Salerno, and drenched them only with her tears, or water perfumed with roses or orange blossoms. And 'twas her wont ever to sit beside this pot, and all her soul one yearning, to pour upon it, as that which enshrined her Lorenzo, and when long time she had so done, she would bend over it, and weep a great while, until the basil was quite bathed in her tears. Fostered with such constant unremitting care, and nourished by the richness given to the soil by the decaying head that lay therein, the basil burgeoned out in exceeding great beauty and fragrance. And the girl persevering ever in this way of life, the neighbours from time to time took note of it, and when her brothers marvelled to see her beauty ruined, and her eyes as it were evanished from her head, they told them of it, saying, "We have observed that such is her daily wont." Whereupon the brothers, marking her behaviour, tried her therefore once or twice, and as she heeded them not, caused the pot to be taken privily from her, which, so soon as she missed it, she demanded with the utmost instance and insistence, and, as they gave it not back to her, ceased not to wail and weep, insomuch as she fell sick, nor in her sickness craved she aught but the pot of basil. Whereat the young men, marvelling mightily, resolved to see what the pot might contain, and having removed the earth, they espied the cloth, and therein the head, which was not yet so decayed, but that by the curled locks they knew it for Lorenzo's head. Passing strange they found it, and fearing lest it should be bruited abroad, they buried the head, and, with as little said as might be, took order of their privy departure from Messina, and hied them thence to Naples. The girl ceased not to weep and crave her pot, and so weeping died. Such was the end of her disastrous love, but not a few in course of time coming to know the truth of the affair, there was one that made the song that is still sung, to wit, "A thief he was, I swear, a sorry Christian he, that took my basil of Salerno fair," etc. End of Day 4, the 5th story.
Day 4, the 6th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eugene Smith. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 4, the 6th story. Andreula loves Gabriotto. She tells him a dream that she has had. He tells her a dream of his own, and dies suddenly in her arms. While she and her Maya are carrying his corpse to his house, they are taken by the Signory. She tells how the matter stands, is threatened with violence by the Podestà, but will not brook it. Her father hears how she is bested, and her innocence being established, causes her to be set at large. But she, being minded to tarry no longer in the world, becomes a nun.
Glad indeed were the ladies to have heard Philomena's story, for that, often though they had heard the song sung, they had never yet, for all their inquiries, been able to learn the occasion upon which it was made. Where it was ended, Pamphilo received the king's command to follow suit, and thus spoke.
By the dream told in the foregoing story, I am prompted to relate one in which two dreams are told, dreams of that which was to come, as Lisabetta's was of that which had been, and which were both fulfilled almost as soon as they were told by those that had dreamed them. Wherefore, loving ladies, you must know that 'tis the common experience of mankind to have diverse visions during sleep, and albeit the sleeper, while he sleeps, deems all alike most true, but being awake, judges some of them to be true, others to be probable, and others again to be quite devoid of truth. Yet not a few are found to have come to pass. For which cause many are as sure of every dream as of aught that they see in their waking hours, and so, as their dreams engender in them fear or hope, or sorrowful or joyous. And on the other hand, there are those that credit no dream until they see themselves fallen into the very peril whereof they were forewarned. Of whom I approve neither sort, for in sooth neither are all dreams true, nor all alike false. That they are not all true, there is none of us but may many a time have proved, and that they are not all alike false has already been shown in Philomena's story, and shall also, as I said before, be shown in mine. Wherefore I deem that in a virtuous course of life and conduct there is no need to fear aught by reason of any dream that is contrary thereto, or on that account to give up any just design. And as for crooked and sinister enterprises, however dreams may seem to favour them, and flatter the hopes of the dreamer with auspicious omens, none should trust them. Rather should all give full credence to such as run counter thereto. But come we to the story. In the city of Brescia there lived of yore a gentleman named Messer Negro da Ponte Carraro, who, with other children, had a very fair daughter, Andreola by name, who, being unmarried, chanced to fall in love with a neighbour, one Gabriotto, a man of low degree, but goodly of person and debonair, and endowed with all admirable qualities. And, aided and abetted by the housemaid, the girl not only brought it to pass that Gabriotto knew that he was beloved of her, but that many a time, to their mutual delight, he came to see her in a fair garden belonging to her father, and that naught but death might avail to sever them from this their gladsome love, they became privily man and wife. And while thus they continued their clandestine intercourse, it happened that one night, while the girl slept, she saw herself in a dream in her garden with Gabriotto, who, to the exceeding great delight of both, held her in his arms. And while thus they lay, she saw issue from his body, somewhat dark and frightful, the shape whereof she might not discern, which, as she thought, laid hold of Gabriotto, and in her despite with prodigious force reft him from her embrace, and bore him with it underground, so that both were lost to her sight for evermore. Whereby, stricken with sore and inexpressible grief, she awoke, and albeit she was overjoyed to find that 'twas not as she had dreamed, yet a haunting dread of what she had seen in her vision entered her soul. Wherefore, Gabriotto being minded to visit her on the ensuing night, She did her best endeavour to dissuade him from coming, but seeing that he was bent upon it, lest he should suspect somewhat, she received him in her garden, where, having culled roses many, white and red, for 'twas summer, she sat herself down with him at the base of a most fair and lucent fountain. There long and joyously they dallied, and then Gabriotto asked her wherefore she had that day forbade his coming, whereupon the lady told him her dream of the night before, and the doubt and fear which it had engendered in her mind, whereat Gabriotto laughed, and said that 'twas the height of folly to put any faith in dreams, for that they were occasioned by too much or too little food, and were daily seen to be, one and all, things of naught, adding, "Were I minded to give heed to dreams, I should not be here now, for I too had a dream last night, which was on this wise. Methought I was in a fair and pleasant wood, and there, a-hunting, caught a she-goat, as beautiful and lovable as any that ever was seen, and, as it seemed to me, whiter than snow, which in a little while grew so tame and friendly that she never stirred from my side. All the same, so jealous was I lest she should leave me, that, meseemed, I had set a collar of gold around her neck, and held her by a golden chain. And presently meseemed that, while the she-goat lay at rest with her head in my lap, there came forth, I know not whence, a greyhound bitch, black as coal, famished, and most fearsome to look upon, which made straight for me, and for, meseemed, I offered no resistance, set her muzzle to my breast on the left side, and gnawed through to the heart, which, meseemed, she tore out to carry away with her. Whereupon ensued so sore a pain that it brake my sleep, and as I awoke, I laid my hand to my side to feel if aught were amiss there. But finding nothing, I laughed at myself that I had searched. But what signifies it all? Visions of the like sort, ay, and far more appalling, have I had plenty, and naught whatever, great or small, has come of any of them. So let it pass, and think we how we may speed the time merrily. What she heard immensely enhanced the already great dread which her own dream had inspired in the girl, but, not to vex Gabriotto, she dissembled her terror as best she might. But though she made great cheer, embracing and kissing him, and receiving his embraces and kisses, yet she felt a doubt, she knew not why, and many a time, more than her wont, she would gaze upon his face, and ever and anon her glance would stray through the garden to see if any black creature were coming from any quarter. While thus they passed the time, of a sudden Gabriotto heaved a great sigh, and embracing her said, "Alas, my soul, thy succour, for I die." And so saying, he fell down upon the grassy mead. Whereupon the girl drew him to her, and laid him on her lap, and all but wept, and said, "O sweet my lord, what is it that ails thee?" But Gabriotto was silent, and gasping sore for breath, and bathed in sweat, in no long time departed this life. How grievous was the distress of the girl who loved him more than herself, you, my ladies, may well imagine. With many a tear she mourned him, and many times she vainly called him by his name. But when, having felt his body all over, and found it cold in every part, she could no longer doubt that he was dead, knowing not what to say or do, she went, tearful and woebegone, to call the maid to whom she had confided her love, and showed her the woeful calamity that had befallen her. Piteously awhile they wept together over the dead face of Gabriotto, and then the girl said to the maid, "Now that God has reft him from me, I have no mind to linger in this life, but before I slay myself, I would we might find apt means to preserve my honour and the secret of our love, and to bury the body from which the sweet soul has fled." "My daughter," said the maid, speak not of slaying thyself, for so wouldst thou lose in the other world also him that thou hast lost here, seeing that thou wouldst go to hell, whither, sure I am, his soul is not gone, for a good youth he was. Far better were it to put on a cheerful courage, and bethink thee to succour his soul with thy prayers or pious works, if perchance he have need thereof by reason of any sin that he may have committed. We can bury him readily enough in this garden, nor will anyone ever know, for none knows that we ever came hither, and if thou wilt not have it so, we can bear him forth of the garden, and leave him there, and on the morrow he will be found, and carried home, and buried by his kinsfolk. The girl, heavy laden though she was with anguish, and still weeping, yet gave ear to the counsels of her maid, and rejecting the former alternative, made answer to the latter on this wise. Now God forbid that a youth so dear, whom I have so loved and made my husband, should with my consent be buried like a dog, or left out there in the street. He has had my tears, and so far as I may avail, he shall have the tears of his kinsfolk, and already wot I what we must do. And forthwith she sent the maid for a piece of silken cloth, which she had in one of her boxes, and when the maid returned with it, they spread it on the ground, and laid Gabriotto's body thereon, resting the head upon a pillow. She then closed the eyes and mouth, shedding the while many a tear, wove for him a wreath of roses, and strewed upon him all the roses that he and she had gathered. Which done, she said to the maid, "'Tis but a short way hence to the door of his house, so thither we will bear him, thou and I, thus as we might have dight him, and will lay him at the door. Day will soon dawn, and they will take him up, and, though 'twill be no consolation to them, I, in whose arms he died, shall be glad of it." So saying, she burst once more into a torrent of tears, and fell with her face upon the face of the dead, and so long time she wept. Then, yielding at last to the urgency of her maid, for day was drawing nigh, she arose, drew from her finger the ring with which she had been wedded to Gabriotto, and set it on his finger, saying with tears, "Dear my lord, if thy soul be witness of my tears, or if, when the spirit is fled, aught of intelligence or sense shall lurk in the body, graciously receive the last gift of her whom in life thou didst so dearly love." Which said, she swooned and fell upon the corpse. But, coming after a while to herself, she arose, and then she and her maid took the cloth whereon the body lay, and so bearing it, quitted the garden, and bent their steps towards the dead man's house. As thus they went, it chanced that certain of the Podesta's guard, that for some reason or other were abroad at that hour, met them, and arrested them with the corpse. Andriola, to whom death was more welcome than life, no sooner knew them for the officers of the Signory, and she frankly said, "I know you, who you are, and that flight would avail me nothing. I am ready to come with you before the Signory, and to tell all there is to tell. But let none of you presume to touch me, so long as I obey you, or to take away aught that is on this body, if he would not that I accuse him." And so, none venturing to lay hand upon either her person or the corpse, she entered the palace. As soon as the Podestà was apprised of the affair, he arose, had her brought into his room, and there made himself conversant with the circumstances. And certain physicians being charged to inquire whether the good man had met his death by poison or otherwise, all with one accord averred that 'twas not by poison, but that he was choked by the bursting of an imposthume near the heart. Which, when the Podestà heard, perceiving that the girl's guilt could be but slight, he sought to make a pretence of giving what it was not lawful for him to sell her, and told her that he would set her at liberty so she were consenting to pleasure him. But finding that he did but waste his words, he cast aside all decency, and would have used force. Whereupon Andreola, kindling with scorn, waxed exceeding brave, and defended herself with a virile energy, and with high and contumelious words drove him from her. When 'twas broad day, the affair reached the ears of Messer Negro, who, half dead with grief, hied him with not a few of his friends to the palace, where, having heard all that Podestà had to say, he required him peremptorily to give him back his daughter. The Podestà, being minded rather to be his own accuser than that he should be accused by the girl of the violence that he had meditated towards her, began by praising her and her constancy, and in proof thereof went on to tell what he had done. He ended by saying that, marking her admirable firmness, he had fallen mightily in love with her, and so, notwithstanding she had been wedded to a man of low degree, he would, if 'twere agreeable to her and to her father, Messer Negro, gladly make her his wife. While they thus spoke, Andreola made her appearance, and, weeping, threw herself at her father's feet, saying, "My father, I wot I need not tell you the story of my presumption and the calamity that has befallen me, for sure I am that you have heard it and know it. Wherefore, with all possible humility, I crave your pardon of my fault, to wit, that without your knowledge I took for my husband him that pleased me best. And this I crave, not that my life may be spared, but that I may die as your daughter, and not as your enemy." And so, weeping, she fell at his feet. Messer Negro, now an old man, and naturally kindly and affectionate, heard her not without tears, and, weeping, raised her tenderly to her feet, saying, "Daughter mine, I had much liefer had it that thou hadst had a husband that I deemed a match for thee, and in that thou hadst taken one that pleased thee, I too had been pleased. But thy concealing thy choice from me is grievous to me, by reason of my distrust of me, and yet more so, seeing that thou hast lost him before I have known him. But as 'tis even so, to his remains be paid the honour which, while he lived for thy contentment, I had gladly done him as my son-in-law." Then, turning to his sons and kinsmen, he bade them order Gabriotto's obsequies with all pomp and honourable circumstance. Meanwhile, the young man's kinsmen and kinswomen, having heard the news, had flocked thither, bringing with them almost all the rest of the folk, men and women alike, that were in the city. And so his body, resting on Andreola's cloth, and covered with her roses, was laid out in the middle of the courtyard, and there was mourned, not by her and his kinfolk alone, but publicly, by well-nigh all the women of the city, and not a few men, and shouldered by some of the noblest of the citizens, as it had been the remains of no plebeian, but of a noble, was borne from the public yard to the tomb with exceeding great pomp. Some days afterwards, as the Podestà continued to urge his suit, Messer Negro would have discussed the matter with his daughter, but, as she would hear none of it, and he was minded in this matter to defer to her wishes, she and her maid entered a religious house of great repute for sanctity, where in just esteem they lived long time thereafter. End of Day 4, the 6th story.
Day 4, the 7th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 4, the 7th story. Simone loves Pasquino. They are together in a garden. Pasquino rubs a leaf of sage against his teeth and dies. Simone is arrested, and, with intent to show the judge how Pasquino died, rubs one of the leaves of the same plant against her teeth, and likewise dies.
When Pamphilo had done with his story, the king, betraying no compassion for Androla, glancing at Emilia, signified to her his desire that she should now continue the sequence of narration. Emilia made no demur, and thus began.
Dear gossips, Pamphilo's story puts me upon telling you another, in no wise like thereto, save in this, that as Andriola lost her lover in a garden, so also did she of whom I am to speak, and, being arrested like Andriola, did also deliver herself from the court, albeit 'twas not by any vigour or firmness of mind, but by a sudden death. And as 'twas said among us a while ago, albeit love affects the mansions of the noble, he does not, therefore, disdain the dominion of the dwellings of the poor, nay, does there at times give proof of his might no less signal than when he makes him feared of the wealthiest as a most potent lord; which, though not fully, will in some degree appear in my story, wherewith I am minded to return to our city, from which today's discourse, roving from matter to matter, and one part of the world to another, has carried us so far. Know then that no great while ago there dwelt in Florence a maid most fair, and for her rank debonair, she was but a poor man's daughter, whose name was Simona, and though she must needs win with her own hands the bread she ate, and maintain herself by spinning wool, yet was she not therefore of so poor a spirit but that she dared to give harbourage in her mind to Love, who for some time had sought to gain entrance there by means of the gracious deeds and words of a young man of her own order that went about distributing wool to spin for his master, a woolmonger. Love being thus, with a pleasant image of her beloved Pasquino, admitted into her soul, mightily did she yearn, albeit she hazarded no advance, and heaved 1,000 sighs fiercer than fire with every skein of yarn that she wound upon her spindle, while she called to mind who he was that had given her that wool to spin. Pasquino on his part became, meanwhile, very anxious that his master's wool should be well spun, and most particularly about that which Simona span, as if, indeed, it and it alone was to furnish forth the whole of the cloth. And so, what with the anxiety which the one evinced, and the gratification that it afforded to the other, it befell that, the one waxing unusually bold, and the other casting off not a little of her wonted shyness and reserve, they came to an understanding for their mutual solace, which proved so delightful to both that neither waited to be bidden by the other, but was rather which should be the first to make the overture. While thus they spent their days in an even tenor of delight, and ever grew more ardently enamoured of one another, Pasquino chanced to say to Simona that he wished of all things she would contrive how she might betake her to a garden, whither he would bring her, that there they might be more at their ease, and in greater security. Simona said that she was agreeable, and, having given her father to understand that she was minded to go to San Gallo for the pardoning, she hied her with one of her gossips, Lagina by name, to the garden of which Pasquino had told her. Here she found Pasquino awaiting her with a friend, one Puccino, otherwise Stramba, and Stramba and Lagina falling at once to love-making, Pasquino and Simona left a part of the garden to them, and withdrew to another part for their own solace. Now there was in their part of the garden a very fine and lovely sage-bush, at foot of which they sat them down and made merry together a great while, and talked much of a junketing they meant to have in the garden quite at their ease. By and by Pasquino, turning to the great sage-bush, plucked therefrom a leaf, and fell to rubbing his teeth and gums therewith, saying that sage was an excellent detergent of aught that remained upon them after a meal. Having done so, he returned to the topic of the junketing of which he had spoken before. But he had not pursued it far before his countenance entirely changed, and forthwith he lost sight and speech, and shortly after died. Whereupon Simona fell a-weeping and shrieking, and calling Stramba and Lagina, who, notwithstanding they came up with all speed, found Pasquino not only dead, but already swollen from head to foot, and covered with black spots both on the face and on the body. Whereupon Stramba broke forth with, "Ah, wicked woman, thou hast poisoned him," and made such a din that was heard by not a few that dwelt hard by the garden, who also hasted to the spot, and seeing Pasquino dead and swollen, and hearing Stramba bewail himself and accuse Simona of having maliciously poisoned him, while she, all but beside herself for grief to be thus suddenly bereft of her lover, knew not how to defend herself, did all with one accord surmise that 'twas even as Stramba said. Wherefore they laid hands on her, and brought her, still weeping bitterly, to the palace of the Podesta, where at the instant suit of Stramba, backed by Ch41 and Malagevole, two other newly arrived friends of Pasquino, a judge forthwith addressed himself to question her of the matter, and being unable to discover that she had used any wicked practice or was guilty, he resolved to take her with him and go see the corpse and the place and the manner of the death, as she had recounted it to him, for by her words he could not well understand it. So, taking care that there should be no disturbance, he had her brought to the place where Pasquino's corpse lay swollen like a tun, whither he himself presently came, and marvelling as he examined the corpse, asked her how the death had come about. Whereupon, standing by the sage-bush, she told him all that had happened, and that he might perfectly apprehend the occasion of the death, she did as Pasquino had done, plucked one of the leaves from the bush, and rubbed her teeth with it. Whereupon Stramba and Aticeato, and the rest of the friends and comrades of Pasquino, making in the presence of the judge open mock of what she said, as an idle and vain thing, and being more than ever instant to affirm her guilt, and to demand the fire as the sole condign penalty, the poor creature that, between grief for her lost lover and dread of the doom demanded by Stramba, stood mute and helpless, was stricken no less suddenly, and in the same manner, and for the same cause, to wit, that she had rubbed her teeth with the sage-leaf, as Pasquino, to the no small amazement of all that were present. O happy souls for whom one and the same day was the term of ardent love and earthly life! Happier still, if to the same bourne ye fared. Ay, and even yet more happy, if love there be in the other world, and there, even as here, ye love. But happiest of all Simona, so far as we, whom she has left behind, may judge, in that fortune brooked not that the witness of Stramba, Aticeato, and Malagevole, carders, perchance, or yet viler fellows, should bear down her innocence, but found a more seemly issue, and appointing her a like lot with her lover, gave her at once to clear herself from their foul accusation, and to follow whither the soul that she so loved of her Pasquino had preceded her. The judge and all else that witnessed the event remained long time in a sort of stupefaction, knowing not what to say of it. But at length recovering his wits, the judge said, "'Twould seem that this sage is poisonous, which the sage is not used to be. Let it be cut down to the roots and burned, lest another suffer by it in like sort." Which the gardener, proceeding to do in the judge's presence, no sooner had he brought the great bush down than the cause of the death of the two lovers plainly appeared. For underneath it was a toad of prodigious dimensions, from whose venomous breath, as they conjectured, the whole of the bush had contracted a poisonous quality. Around which toad, none venturing to approach it, they set a stout ring fence of faggots, and burned it together with the sage. So ended Master Judge's inquest on the death of hapless Pasquino, who, with his Simona, swollen as they were buried by Stramba, Aticeato, Guccio Umbretta, and Malagevole in the church of San Paolo, of which, as it so happened, they were parishioners. End of Day 4, the 7th story.
Day 4, the 8th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ruth Golding. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 4, the 8th story. Girolamo loves Salvestra. Yielding to his mother's prayers, he goes to Paris. He returns to find Salvestra married. He enters her house by stealth, lays himself by her side, and dies. He is borne to the church, where Salvestra lays herself by his side, and dies.
When Emilius' story was done, Neifile, at a word from the king, thus began.
Some there are, noble ladies, who, methinks, deem themselves to be wiser than the rest of the world, and are, in fact, less so, and by consequence presume to measure their wit against not only the counsels of men, but the nature of things; which presumption has from time to time been the occasion of most grievous mishaps, but nought of good was ever seen to betide thereof. And as there is nought in nature that brooks to be schooled or thwarted so ill as love, the quality of which is such that it is more likely to die out of its own accord than to be done away of set purpose, I am minded to tell you a story of a lady, who, while she sought to be more wise than became her, and than she was, and indeed than the nature of the matter wherein she studied to show her wisdom allowed, thinking to unseat love from the heart that he had occupied, and wherein perchance the stars had established him, did in the end banish at one and the same time love and life from the frame of her son. Know then that, as 'tis related by them of old time, there was once in our city a very great and wealthy merchant, Leonardo Sigieri by name, who had by his lady a son named Girolamo, after whose birth he departed this life, leaving his affairs in meet and due order. And well and faithfully were they afterwards administered in the interest of the boy by his mother and guardians. As he grew up, consorting more frequently with the neighbours' children than any others of the quarter, he made friends with a girl of his own age that was the daughter of a tailor, and in course of time this friendship ripened into a love so great and vehement that Girolamo was ever ill at ease when he saw her not. Nor was her love for him a whit less strong than his for her, which his mother perceiving would not seldom chide him therefore, and chastise him, and as Girolamo could not give it up, she confided her distress to his guardians, speaking, for by reason of her boy's great wealth she thought to make, as it were, an orange tree out of a bramble, on this wise: "This boy of ours, who is now scarce 14 years old, is so in love with a daughter of one of our neighbours, a tailor, Salvestra is the girl's name, that if we part them not, he will, peradventure, none else witting, take her to wife some day, and I shall never be happy again. Or if he see her married to another, he will pine away. To prevent which, methinks you could do well to send him away to distant parts on the affairs of the shop. For so, being out of sight, she will come at length to be out of mind, and then we can give him some well-born girl to wife." Whereto the guardians answered that 'twas well said, and that it should be so done to the best of their power. So they called the boy into the shop, and one of them began talking to him very affectionately on this wise: "My son, thou art now almost grown up. 'Twere well thou shouldst now begin to learn something for thyself of thy own affairs. Wherefore we should be very well pleased if thou wert to go stay at Paris a while, where thou wilt see how we trade with not a little of thy wealth, besides which thou wilt there become a much better, finer, and more complete gentleman than thou couldst here. And when thou hast seen the lords and barons and seigneurs that there are in plenty, and hast acquired their manners, thou canst return hither." The boy listened attentively, and then answered shortly that he would have none of it, for he supposed he might remain at Florence as well as another. Whereupon the worthy men plied him with fresh argument, but were unable to elicit other answer from him, and told his mother so. Whereat she was mightily incensed, and gave him a great scolding, not for his refusing to go to Paris, but for his love; which done, she plied him with soft wheedling words, and endearing expressions, and gentle entreaties, that he would be pleased to do as his guardians would have him. Whereby at length she prevailed so far that he consented to go to Paris for a year and no more, and so 'twas arranged. To Paris accordingly our ardent lover went, and there under one pretext or another was kept for 2 years. he returned more in love than ever, to find his Salvestra married to a good youth that was a tent maker, whereat his mortification knew no bounds. But seeing that what must be, he sought to compose his mind, and having got to know where she lived, he took to crossing her path, according to the wont of young men in love, thinking that she could no more have forgotten him than he her. 'Twas otherwise, however. She remembered him no more than if she had never seen him, or if she had any recollection of him she dissembled it, whereof the young man was very soon ware to his extreme sorrow. Nevertheless he did all that he could to recall himself to her mind, but as thereby he seemed to be nothing advantaged, he made up his mind, though he should die for it, to speak to her himself. So, being instructed as to her house by a neighbour, he entered it privily one evening, when she and her husband were gone to spend the earlier hours with some neighbours, and hid himself in her room behind some tent cloths that were stretched there, and waited till they were come back and gone to bed, and he knew the husband to be asleep. Whereupon he got him to the place where he had seen Salvestra lie down, and said, as he gently laid his hand upon her bosom, "O my soul, art thou yet asleep?" The girl was awake, and was on the point of uttering a cry, when he forestalled her, saying, "Hush, for God's sake, I am thy Girolamo." Whereupon she, trembling in every limb, "Nay, but for God's sake, Girolamo, be gone. 'Tis past the time of our childhood, when our love was excusable. Thou seest I am married, wherefore 'tis no longer seemly that I should care for any other man than my husband. And so, by the one God, I pray thee, be gone. For if my husband were to know that thou art here, the least evil that could ensue would be that I should never more be able to live with him in peace or comfort, whereas, having his love, I now pass my days with him in tranquil happiness." Which speech caused the young man grievous distress, but 'twas in vain that he reminded her of the past, and of his love that distance had not impaired, and therewith mingled many a prayer and the mightiest protestations. Wherefore, yearning for death, he besought her at last that she would suffer him to lie a while beside her, till he got some heat, for he was chilled through and through, waiting for her, and promised her that he would say never a word to her, nor touch her, and that as soon as he was a little warmed, he would go away. On which terms, Salvestra, being not without pity for him, granted his request. So the young man lay down beside her, and touched her not, but gathering up into one thought the love he had so long borne her, the harshness with which she now requited it, and his ruined hopes, resolved to live no longer, and in a convulsion, without a word, and with fists clenched, expired by her side. After a while, the girl, marvelling at his countenance, and fearing lest her husband should awake, broke silence, saying, "Nay, but Girolamo, why goest thou not?" But receiving no answer, she supposed that he slept. Wherefore, reaching forth her hand to arouse him, she touched him, and found him, to her great surprise, cold as ice. And touching him again and again, somewhat rudely, and still finding that he did not stir, she knew that he was dead. Her grief was boundless, and 'twas long before she could bethink her how to act. But at last she resolved to sound her husband's mind as to what should be done in such a case, without disclosing that 'twas his own. So she awakened him, and told him how he was then bested, as if it were the affair of another, and then asked him, if such a thing happened to her, what course he would take. The good man answered that he should deem it best to take the dead man privily home, and there leave him, bearing no grudge against the lady, who seemed to have done no wrong. "And even so," said his wife, "it is for us to do." And taking his hand, she laid it on the corpse, whereat he started up in consternation and struck a light, and without further parley with his wife, clapped the dead man's clothes upon him, and forthwith, confident in his own innocence, raised him on his shoulders and bore him to the door of his house, where he set him down and left him. Day came, and the dead man being found before his own door, there was a great stir made, particularly by his mother. The body was examined with all care from head to foot, and no wound or trace of violence being found on it, the physicians were on the whole of opinion that, as the fact was, the man had died of grief. So the corpse was borne to a church, and thither came the sorrowing mother and other ladies, her kinswomen and neighbours, and began to wail and mourn over it without restraint, after our Florentine fashion. And when the wailing had reached its height, the good man in whose house the death had occurred said to Salvestra, "Go wrap a mantle about thy head, and hie thee to the church, whither Girolamo has been taken, and go about among the women and list what they say of this matter, and I will do the like among the men, that we may hear if aught be said to our disadvantage." The girl assented, for with tardy tenderness she now yearned to look on him dead, whom living she would not solace with a single kiss, and so to the church she went. Ah, how marvellous to whoso ponders it is the might of love, and how unsearchable his ways! That heart, which, while fortune smiled on Girolamo, had remained sealed to him, opened to him now that he was fordone, and kindling anew with all its old flame, melted with such compassion, that no sooner saw she his dead face, as she there stood wrapped in her mantle, than, edging her way forward through the crowd of women, she stayed not till she was beside the corpse, and there, uttering a piercing shriek, she threw herself upon the dead youth, and as her face met his, and before she might drench it with her tears, grief that had reft life from him had even so reft it from her. The women strove to comfort her, and bade her raise herself a little, for as yet they knew her not. Then, as she did not arise, they would have helped her, but found her stiff and stark, and so, raising her up, they in one and the same moment saw her to be Salvestra, and dead. Whereat all the women that were there, overborne by a redoubled pity, broke forth in wailing new and louder far than before. From the church the bruit spread itself among the men, and reached the ears of Salvestra's husband, who, deaf to all that offered comfort or consolation, wept a long while. After which he told to not a few that were there what had passed in the night between the youth and his wife. And so 'twas known of all how they came to die, to the common sorrow of all. So they took the dead girl, and arrayed her as they are wont to array the dead, and laid her on the same bed beside the youth, and long time they mourned her. Then they were both buried in the same tomb, and thus those whom love had not been able to wed in life were wedded by death in indissoluble union. End of Day 4, the 8th story. Recording by Ruth Golding.
Day 4, the 9th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 4, the 9th story. Sieur Guillaume de Roussillon slays his wife's paramour, Sieur Guillaume de Cabestang, and gives her his heart to eat. She, coming to wit thereof, throws herself from a high window to the ground, and dies, and is buried with her lover.
Nephil's story, which had not failed to move the gossips to no little pity, being ended, none now remained to speak but the king, and Dionéo, whose privilege the king was minded not to infringe. Wherefore he thus began:
I propose, compassionate my ladies, to tell you a story, which, seeing that you so commiserate ill-starred loves, may claim no less a share of your pity than the last, insomuch as they were greater folks of whom I shall speak, and that which befell them was more direful. You are to know then, as the Provençals relate, that there was in Provence 2 noble knights, each having castles and vassals under him, the one Sieur Guillaume de Roussillon, and the other Sieur Guillaume de Cabestany, and being both most doughty warriors, they were as brothers, and went ever together, and bearing the same device to tournament or joust, or other passages of arms. And albeit each dwelt in his own castle, and the castles were a good 10 miles apart, it nevertheless came to pass that Sieur Guillaume de Roussillon, having a most lovely lady, and amorous withal, to wife, Sieur Guillaume de Cabestany, for all they were such friends and comrades, became inordinately enamoured of the lady, who by this, that, and the other sign that he gave, discovered his passion, and knowing him for the most complete knight, was flattered, and returned it, insomuch that she yearned and burned for him above all else in the world, and waited only till he should make his suit to her, as before long he did, and so they met from time to time, and great was their love. Which intercourse they ordered with so little discretion that 'twas discovered by the husband, who was very wroth, insomuch that the great love which he bore to Cabestany was changed into mortal enmity, and, dissembling it better than the lovers their love, he made his mind up to kill Cabestany. Now it came to pass that, while Roussillon was in this frame, a great tourney was proclaimed in France, whereof Roussillon sent forth word to Cabestany, and bade him to his castle, so he were minded to come, that there they might discuss whether or no to go to the tourney, and how. Cabestany was overjoyed, and made answer that he would come to sup with him the next day without fail. Which message being delivered, Roussillon wist that the time was come to slay Cabestany. So next day he armed himself, and attended by a few servants took horse, and about a mile from his castle lay in ambush in a wood through which Cabestany must needs pass. He waited for some time, then he saw Cabestany approach, unarmed, with 2 servants behind, also unarmed, for he was without thought of peril on Roussillon's part. So Cabestany came unto the place of Roussillon's choice, and then, fell and vengeful, Roussillon leapt forth lance in hand, and fell upon him, exclaiming, "Thou art a dead man!" And the words were no sooner spoken than the lance was through Cabestany's breast. Powerless either to defend himself, or even utter a cry, Cabestany fell to the ground, and soon expired. His servants waited not to see who had done the deed, but turned their horses' heads, and fled with all speed to their lord's castle. Roussillon dismounted, and opened Cabestany's breast with a knife, and took out the heart with his own hands, wrapped it up in a banderole, and gave it to one of his servants to carry. He then bade none make bold to breathe a word of the affair, mounted his horse, and rode back, 'twas not night, to his castle. The lady, who had been told that Cabestany was to come to supper that evening, was all impatience till he should come, and was greatly surprised to see her husband arrive without him. Wherefore, "How is this, my lord?" said she. "Why tarries Cabestany?" "Madam," answered her husband, "I have tidings from him that he cannot be here until tomorrow." Whereat the lady was somewhat disconcerted. Having dismounted, Roussillon called the cook, and said to him, "Here is a boar's heart, take it, and make thereof the daintiest and most delicious dish thou canst, and when I am set at table serve it in a silver porringer." So the cook took the heart, and expended all his skill and pains upon it, mincing it, and mixing with it plenty of good seasoning, and made thereof an excellent ragout. And in due time Sieur Guillaume and his lady sat them down to table. The meat was served, but Sieur Guillaume, his mind engrossed with his crime, ate but little. The cook set the ragout before him, but he, feigning that he cared to eat no more that evening, had it passed on to the lady, and highly commended it. The lady, nothing loath, took some of it, and found it so good that she ended by eating the whole. Whereupon, "Madam," quoth the knight, "how liked you this dish?" "In good faith, my lord," replied the lady, "not a little." So help me God, returned the knight, I dare to be sworn you did. 'Tis no wonder that you should enjoy that dead which you living enjoyed more than aught else in the world. For a while the lady was silent. Then, how say you, said she, what is it you have caused me to eat? That which you have eaten, replied the knight, was in good sooth the heart of Sieur Guillaume de Cabestang, whom you, disloyal woman that you are, did so much love. For assurance whereof I tell you that, but a short while before I came back, I plucked it from his breast with my own hands. It boots not to ask if the lady was sorrow-stricken to receive such tidings of her best beloved. But after a while she said, 'Twas the deed of a disloyal and recreant knight, for if I, unconstrained by him, made him lord of my love, and thereby did you wrong, 'twas I, not he, should have borne the penalty. But God forbid that fair, of such high excellence as the heart of a knight, so true and courteous as Sieur Guillaume de Cabestang, be followed by aught else. So saying, she started to her feet, and stepping back to a window that was behind her, without a moment's hesitation let herself drop backwards therein. The window was at a great height from the ground, so the lady was not only killed by the fall, but almost reduced to atoms. Stunned and conscience-stricken by the spectacle, and fearing the vengeance of the country folk and the Count of Provence, Sieur Guillaume had his horses saddled and rode away. On the morrow the whole countryside knew how the affair had come about. Wherefore folk from both of the castles took the two bodies, and bore them with grief and lamentation exceeding great to the church in the lady's castle, and laid them in the same tomb, and caused verses to be inscribed thereof, signifying who they were that were there interned, and the manner and occasion of their death. End of Day 4, the 9th story.
Day 4, the 10th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please go to LibriVox.org. Reading by Andy Minter. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 4, the 10th story. The wife of a leech, deeming her lover, who has taken an opiate, to be dead, puts him in a chest, which, with him therein, two usurers carry off to their house. He comes to himself, and is taken for a thief, but, the lady's maid giving the signori to understand that she had put him in the chest, which the usurers stole, he escapes the gallows, and the usurers are mulcted in moneys for the theft of the chest.
Now that the king had told his tale, it only remained for Dioneo to do his part, which he witting, and being thereto bidden by the king, thus began.
So have I, to say naught of you, my ladies, been of iron and heart to hear the woeful histories of ill-starred love, insomuch that I have desired of all things that they might have an end. Wherefore, now that, thank God, ended they are, unless I were minded, which God forbid, to add to such pernicious stuff a supplement of the like evil quality, no such dolorous theme do I purpose to ensue, but to make a fresh start with somewhat of a better and more cheerful sort, which perchance may serve to suggest to-morrow's argument. You are to know, then, fairest my damsels, that 'tis not long since there dwelt at Salerno a leech most eminent in surgery, his name Master Mazzeo della Montagna, who in his extreme old age took to a wife a fair damsel of the same city, whom he kept in nobler and richer array of dresses and jewels, and all other finery that the sex affects, than any other lady in Salerno. Howbeit she was none too warm most of her time, being ill covered abed by the doctor, who gave her to understand, even as Messer Ricciardo de Cinzica, of whom we spoke a while since, taught his lady the feasts, that for once a man lay with a woman, he needed I know not how many days to recover, and the like nonsense, whereby she lived as ill content as might be, and lacking neither sense nor spirit, she determined to economize at home, and taking to the street to live at others' expense. So, having passed in review divers young men, she at last found one that was to her mind, on whom she set all her heart and hopes of happiness, which the gallant perceiving was mightily flattered, and in like manner gave her all his love. Ruggiero de' Jeroli, such was the gallant's name, was of noble birth, but of life and conversation so evil and reprehensible that kinsman or friend he had none left that wished him well, or cared to see him, and all Salerno knew him for a common thief and rogue of the vilest character. Whereof the lady took little heed, having a mind to him for another reason, and so, with the help of her maid, she arranged a meeting with him. But after they had solaced themselves a while, the lady began to censure his past life, and to implore him for love of her to depart from such evil ways, and to afford him the means thereto, she from time to time furnished him with money. While thus with all discretion they continued their intercourse, it chanced that a man halt of one of his legs was placed under the leech's care. The leech saw what was amiss with him, and told his kinsfolk that unless a gangrened bone that he had in his leg were taken out, he must die, or have the whole leg amputated; that if the bone were removed he might recover, but that otherwise he would not answer for his life. Whereupon the relatives assented that the bone should be removed, and left the patient in the hands of the leech, who, deeming that by reason of the pain 'twas not possible for him to endure the treatment without an opiate, caused to be distilled in the morning a certain water of his own concoction, whereby the patient, drinking it, might be ensured sleep during such time as he deemed the operation, which he meant to perform about vespers, would occupy. In the meantime he had the water brought into his house, and set it in the window of his room, telling no one what it was. But when the vesper hour was come, and the leech was about to visit his patient, a messenger arrived from some very great friends of his at Amalfi, bearing tidings of a great riot there had been there, in which not a few had been wounded, and bidding him on no account to omit to hie him thither forthwith. Wherefore the leech put off the treatment of the leg to the morrow, and took boat to Amalfi, and the lady, knowing that he would not return home that night, did as she was wont in such a case, to wit, brought Ruggieri in privily, and locked him in her chamber until certain other folk that were in the house had gone to sleep. Ruggieri, then, being thus in the chamber awaiting the lady, and having, whether it was that he had a fatiguing day, or eaten something salt, or perchance that 'twas his habit of body, a mighty thirst, glancing at the window, caught sight of the bottle containing the water which the leech had prepared for the patient, and taking it to be drinking water, set it to his lips, and drank it all, and in no long time fell into a deep sleep. So soon as she was able, the lady hied her to the room, and there, finding Ruggieri asleep, touched him, and softly told him to get up. To no purpose, however; he neither answered nor stirred a limb. Wherefore the lady, rather losing patience, applied somewhat more force, and gave him a push, saying, "Get up, sleepy head. If thou hadst a mind to sleep, thou shouldst have gone home, and not have come hither." Thus pushed, Ruggieri fell down from a box on which he lay, and falling showed no more sign of animation than if he had been a corpse. The lady, now somewhat alarmed, essayed to lift him, and shook him roughly, and took him by the nose, and pulled him by the beard, again to no purpose. He had tethered his ass to a stout pin, so the lady began to fear he must be dead. However, she went on to pinch him shrewdly, and singe him with the flame of a candle. But when these methods also failed, she, being, for all she was a leech's wife, no leech herself, believed for sure that he was dead. And as there was naught in the world that she loved so much, it boots not to ask if she were sore distressed. Wherefore, silently, for she dared not lament aloud, she began to weep over him, and bewail such a misadventure. But after a while, fearing lest her loss should not be without sequel of shame, she bethought her that she must contrive without delay to get the body out of the house, and standing in need of another's advice, she quietly summoned her maid, showed her the mishap that had befallen her, and craved her counsel. Whereat the maid marvelled not a little, and she too fell to pulling Ruggieri this way and that, and pinching him, and, as she found no sign of life in him, concurred with her mistress that he was verily dead, and advised her to remove him from the house. "And where," said the lady, shall we put him, that to-morrow, when he is discovered, it be not suspected that 'twas hence he was carried? Madam, answered the maid, late last evening I marked in front of our neighbour the carpenter's shop a chest, not too large, which, if he have not put it back in the house, will come in very handy for our purpose, for we will put him inside, and give him 2 or 3 cuts with a knife, and so leave him. When he is found, I know not why it should be thought that 'twas from this house rather than from any other that he was put there. Nay, as he was an evil liver, 'twill be more likely supposed that as he hied him on some evil errand, some enemy slew him, and then put him in the chest. The lady said that there was naught in the world she might so ill brook as that Ruggieri should receive any wound, but with that exception she approved her maid's proposal, and sent her to see if the chest was still where she had seen it. The maid, returning, reported that it was, and being young and strong, got Ruggieri, with the lady's help, upon her shoulders, and so the lady going before, to espy if any folk came that way, and the maid following, they came to the chest, and having laid Ruggieri therein, closed it, and left him there. Now, a few days before, 2 young men that were usurers had taken up their quarters in a house a little further on. They had seen the chest during the day, and being short of furniture, and having a mind to make great gain with little expenditure, they had resolved that if it was still there at night, they would take it home with them. So at midnight forth they hied them, and finding the chest, were at no pains to examine it closely, but forthwith, though it seemed somewhat heavy, bore it off to their house, and set it down beside a room in which their women slept, and without being at pains to adjust it too securely, they left it there for the time, and went to bed. Towards matins, Ruggieri, having had a long sleep, and digested the draught, and exhausted its efficacy, awoke. But albeit his slumber was broken, and his senses had recovered their powers, yet his brain remained in a sort of torpor, which kept him bemused for some days. And when he opened his eyes, and saw nothing, and stretched his hands hither and thither, and found himself in the chest, it was with difficulty that he collected his thoughts. How is this? He said to himself. Where am I? Do I sleep or wake? I remember coming this evening to my lady's chamber, and now it seems I am in a chest. What means it? Can the leech have returned, or somewhat else have happened that caused the lady, while I slept, to hide me here? That was it, I suppose. Without a doubt it must have been so. And having come to this conclusion, he composed himself to listen, if haply he might hear something. And being somewhat ill at ease in the chest, which was none too large, and the side on which he lay paining him, he must needs turn over to the other, and did so with such adroitness that, bringing his loins smartly against one of the sides of the chest, which was set on an uneven floor, he caused it to tilt and then fall, and such was the noise it made as it fell that the women that slept there awoke, albeit for fear they kept silence. Ruggieri was not a little disconcerted by the fall, but, finding that thereby the chest was come open, he judged that, happen what might, he would be better out of it than in it. And not knowing where he was, and being otherwise at his wits' end, he began to grope about the house, if haply he might find a stair or door, whereby he might take himself off. Hearing him thus groping his way, the alarmed women gave tongue with, "Who is there?" Ruggieri, not knowing the voice, made no answer. Wherefore the women fell to calling the 2 young men, who, having had a long day, were fast asleep, and heard naught of what went on, which served to increase the fright of the women, who rose and got them to divers windows, and raised the cry, "Take thief! Take thief!" At which summons there came running from divers quarters not a few of the neighbours, who got into the house by the roof, or otherwise, as each best might. Likewise the young men, aroused by the din, got up, and Ruggieri, being now all but beside himself for sheer amazement, and not knowing whither to turn him to escape them, they took him and delivered him to the officers of the governor of the city, who, hearing the uproar, had hasted to the spot. And so he was brought before the governor, who, knowing him to be held of all a most arrant evildoer, put him forthwith to the torture, and upon his confessing that he had entered the house of the usurers with intent to rob, was minded to make short work of it, and have him hanged by the neck. In the morning 'twas bruited throughout all Salerno that Ruggieri had been taken a thieving in the house of the usurers. Whereat the lady and her maid were all amazement and bewilderment, insomuch that they were within an ace of persuading themselves that what they had done the night before they had not done, but had only dreamt it. Besides which, the peril in which Ruggieri stood caused the lady such anxiety as brought her to the verge of madness. Shortly after half tierce, the leech, being returned from Amalfi, and minded now to treat his patient, called for his water, and finding the bottle empty, made a great commotion, protesting that naught in his house could be left alone. The lady, having other cause of annoy, lost temper, and said, "What would you say, master, of an important matter, when you raise such a din because a bottle of water has been upset? Is there never another to be found in the world?" "Madam," replied the leech, "thou takest this to have been mere water. 'Twas no such thing, but an artificial water of a soporiferous virtue." And he told her for what purpose he had made it. Which the lady no sooner heard than, guessing that Ruggieri had drunk it, and so had seemed to them to be dead, she said, "Master, we know it not. Wherefore make you another?" And so the leech, seeing there was no help for it, had another made. Not long after, the maid, who by the lady's command had gone to find out what folk said of Ruggieri, returned, saying, "Madam, of Ruggieri they say naught but evil, nor, by what I have been able to discover, has he friend or kinsman that has or will come to his aid, and 'tis held for certain that tomorrow the Static will have him hanged. Besides which I have to tell you, which will surprise you, for methinks I have found out how he came into the usurer's house. List, then, how it was. You know the carpenter in front of whose shop stood the chest we put Ruggieri in? He had today the most violent altercation in the world with one to whom it would seem the chest belongs, by whom he was required to make good the value of the chest. To which he made answer that he had not sold it, but that it had been stolen from him in the night. 'Not so,' said the other, 'thou soldst it to the two usurers, as they themselves told me last night, when I saw it at their house at the time Ruggieri was taken.' 'They lie,' replied the carpenter. 'I never sold it to them, but they must have stolen it from me last night. Go we to them.' So with one accord off they went to the usurer's house, and I came back here. And so, you see, I make out that 'twas on such wise that Ruggieri was brought when he was found. But how he came to life again I am at a loss to conjecture." The lady now understood exactly how things were, and accordingly told the maid what she had learnt from the leech, and besought her to aid her to get Ruggieri off, for so she might, if she would, and at the same time preserve her honour. "Madam," said the maid, "do but show me how, and glad I shall be to do just as you wish." Whereupon the lady, to whom necessity taught invention, formed her plan on the spur of the moment, and expounded it in detail to the maid, who, as the first step, hied her to the leech, and weeping thus addressed him: "Sir, it behoves me to ask your pardon of a great wrong that I have done you." "And what may that be?" inquired the leech. "Sir," said the maid, who ceased not to weep, "you know what manner of man is Ruggieri de Jeroli. Now he took a fancy to me, and partly for fear, partly for love, I this year agreed to be his mistress, and knowing yester eve that you were from home, he coaxed me into bringing him into your house to sleep with me in my room. Now he was athirst, and I, having no mind to be seen by your lady, who was in the hall, and knowing not whether I might sooner betake me for wine or water, bethought me that I had seen a bottle of water in your room, and ran and fetched it, and gave it to him to drink, and then put the bottle back in the place whence I had taken it, touching which I find that you have made a great stir in the house. Verily, I confess that I did wrong, but who is there that does not wrong sometimes? Sorry indeed am I to have so done, but 'tis not for such a cause, and that which ensued thereon, that Ruggieri should lose his life. Wherefore I do most earnestly beseech you pardon me, and suffer me to go help him as best I may be able." Wroth though he was at what he heard, the leech replied in a bantering tone: "Thy pardon thou hast by thine own deed, for whereas thou didst last night think to have with thee a gallant that would thoroughly dust thy pelisse for thee, he was but a sleepy head. Wherefore get thee gone, and do what thou mayest for the deliverance of thy lover, and for the future look thou bring him not into the house, else I will pay thee for that turn and this to boot." The maid, deeming that she had come off well in the first brush, hied her with all speed to the prison where Ruggieri lay, and by her cajoleries prevailed upon the warders to let her speak with him, and having told him how he must answer the static if he would get off, she succeeded in obtaining pre-audience of the static, who, seeing that the baggage was lusty and mettlesome, was minded, before he heard her, to grapple her with the hook, to which she was by no means averse, knowing that such a preliminary would secure her a better hearing. When she had undergone the operation and was risen, "Sir," said she, "you have here Ruggieri da Ieroli, apprehended on a charge of theft, which charge is false." Whereupon she told him the whole story from beginning to end, how she, being Ruggieri's mistress, had brought him into the leech's house, and had given him the opiate, not knowing it for such, and taking him to be dead, had put him in the chest. And then, recounting what she had heard pass between the carpenter and the owner of the chest, she showed him how Ruggieri came into the house of the usurers. Seeing that 'twas easy enough to find out whether the story were true, the static began by questioning the leech as to the water, and found that 'twas as she had said. He then summoned the carpenter, the owner of the chest, and the usurers, and after much further parley ascertained that the usurers had stolen the chest during the night and brought it into their house. Finally he sent for Ruggieri, and asked him where he had lodged that night, to which Ruggieri answered that where he had lodged he knew not, but he well remembered going to pass the night with Master Mazzeo's maid, in whose room he had drunk some water by reason of a great thirst that he had. But what happened to him afterwards, except that when he awoke he found himself in the chest in the house of the usurers, he knew not. All which matters the static heard with great interest, and caused the maid and Ruggieri and the carpenter and the usurers to rehearse them several times. In the end, seeing that Ruggieri was innocent, he released him, and mulcted the usurers in 15 ounces for the theft of the chest. How glad Ruggieri was thus to escape, it boots not to ask, and glad beyond measure was his lady, and so many a time did they laugh and make merry together over the affair, she and he and the dear maid that had proposed to give him a taste of the knife, and remaining constant in their love, they had ever better and better solace thereof, the like whereof befalls me, sans the being put in the chest. End of Day 4, the 10th story.
Day 4. The conclusion of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by Ejam Rigg. Day the 4th. The conclusion. Heartsore as the gentle ladies had been made by the preceding stories, this last of Dioneo provoked them to such merriment, more especially the passage about the static on the hook, that they lacked not relief of the piteous mood engendered by the others. But the king, observing that the sun was now taking a yellowish tinge, and that the end of his sovereignty was come, in terms most courtly made his excuse to the fair ladies, that he had made so direful a theme, as lovers in felicity the topic of their discourse. After which he rose, took the laurel wreath from his head, and while the ladies watched to see to whom he would give it, set it graciously upon the blonde head of Fiametta, saying, "Herewith I crown thee, as deeming that thou, better than any other, will know how to make tomorrow console our fair companions for the rude trials of today." Fiametta, whose wavy tresses fell in a flood of gold over her white and delicate shoulders, whose softly rounded face was all radiant with the very tints of the white lily, blended with the red of the rose, who carried 2 eyes in her head that matched those of the peregrine falcon, while her tiny sweet mouth shewed a pair of lips that shone as rubies, replied with a smile, "And gladly take I the wreath, Philostrato, and that thou mayst more truly understand what thou hast done, it is my present will and pleasure that each make ready to discourse tomorrow of good fortune befalling lovers after divers direful or disastrous adventures." The theme propounded was approved by all, whereupon the queen called the seneschal, and having made with him all the meet arrangements, rose and gaily dismissed all the company until the supper hour; wherefore, some straying about the garden, the beauties of which were not such as soon to pall, others bending their steps towards the mills that were grinding without, each as and where it seemed best, they took meanwhile their several pleasures. The supper hour come, they all gathered, in their wonted order, by the fair fountain, and in the gayest of spirits and well served they supped. Then, rising, they adversed them, as was their wont, to dance and song, and while Philomela led the dance, Philostrato, said the queen, being minded to follow in the footsteps of our predecessors, and that as by their, so by our command a song be sung, and well witting that thy songs are even as thy stories, to the end that no day but this be waxed with thy misfortunes, we ordain that thou give us one of them, whichever thou mayst prefer. Philostrato answered that he would gladly do so, and without delay began to sing on this wise:
Full well my tears attest, O traitor love, with what just cause the heart, with which thou once hath broken faith, doth smart. Love, when thou first didst in my heart enshrine her for whom I still sigh, alas, in vain, nor any hope do know, a damsel so complete thou didst me show, that light as air I counted every pain, wherewith, behest of thine, condemned my soul to pine. Ah, but I gravely erred, the which to know, too late, alas, doth but enhance my woe. The cheat I knew not, ere she did leave me, she in whom alone my hopes were placed, for 'twas when I did most flatter myself with hope, and proudly boast myself her vassal lowliest and most graced, nor thought love might begrieve, nor dreamed he e'er might grieve. 'Twas then I found that she another's worth into her heart had taken, and cast me forth. A plant of pain, alas, my heart did bear, what time my hapless self cast forth I knew, and there it doth remain, and day and hour I curse and curse again. When first that front of love shone on my view, that front so queenly fair, and bright beyond compare, wherefore at once my faith, my hope, my fire, my soul doth imprecate, ere she expire. My lord, thou knowest how comfortless my woe. Thou, love, my lord, whom thus I supplicate, with many a piteous groan, telling thee how I anguish, sore I groan, yearning for death my pain to mitigate. Come, death, and with one blow cut short my span, and so, with my cursed life, me of my frenzy ease, for wheresoever I go, 'twill sure decrease. Save death, no way of comfort doth remain, no anodyne beside for this sore smart. The boon then, love bestow, and presently by death annul my woe, and from this abject life release my heart, since from me joy is ta'en, and every solace ta'en. My prayer to grant, and let my death the cheer complete that she now hath of her new fare. Song, it may be that no one shall thee learn, nor do I care, for none I wot so well, as I may chant thee so. This one behest I lay upon thee, go. Hie thee to love, and him in secret tell, how I my life do spurn, my bitter life and yearn, that to a better harborage he bring me of all might and grace that owe him king. Full well my tears attest.
Philostratus' mood and its cause were made abundantly manifest by the words of this song, and perchance they had been made still more so by the looks of a lady that was among the dancers, had not the shades of night, which had now overtaken them, concealed the blush that suffused her face. Other songs followed until the hour for slumber arrived, whereupon, at the behest of the queen, all the ladies sought their several chambers. End of Day 4, the conclusion. Day the fifth. The Introduction of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by M. Rigg. Day the fifth. The Introduction. Endeth here the fourth day of the Decameron, beginneth the fifth, in which, under the rule of Fiametta, discourse is had of good fortune befalling lovers after divers direful or disastrous adventures. All the east was white, nor any part of our hemisphere unillumined by the rising beams, when the carolling of the birds that in a gay chorus saluted the dawn among the baths induced Fiametta to rise, and rose the other ladies and the three gallants, with whom adown the hill and about the dewy meads of the broad champaign she sauntered, talking gaily of divers matters, until the sun had attained some height. Then, feeling his rays grow somewhat scorching, they retraced their steps and returned to the villa, where, having repaired their slight fatigue with excellent wines and comfits, they took their pastime in the pleasant garden until the breakfast hour, when, all things being made ready by the discreet seneschal, they, after singing a stampita and a balladette or two, gaily at the queen's behest, sat them down to eat. Meetly ordered and gladsome was the meal, which done, heedful of their rule of dancing, they trod a few short measures with accompaniment of music and song. Thereupon, being all dismissed by the queen until after the siesta, some hied them to rest, while others tarried taking their pleasure in the fair garden. But shortly after noon, all at the queen's behest reassembled, according to their wont, by the fountain, and the queen, having seated herself on her throne, glanced towards Pamphilo, and bade him, with a smile, lead off with the stories of good fortune. Whereto Pamphilo gladly asserted himself, and thus began. End of Introduction of the Day 5.